Interactions between different species can be beneficial, detrimental, or a neutral experience for the different organisms involved. There are 6 types of interactions. Let's see what each of these interactions look like. Predation, simply put, happens when one species eats another. Most of us think of a lion preying on a deer as a common predator example. However, a bird chewing on a fruit is no less a predator than a lion. Predation is nature's way of transferring energy from the plants up to the various higher levels in the food chain. Predators play a very important role. For one, they check the growth of species in a habitat. If a species is introduced to a habitat where it has absolutely no predators, it will grow in such enormous rates that the entire balance of the habitat will fall haywire. Controlling the population growth of a prey species serves its own interests as well. Consider this. When the number of prey species is kept under check, there's enough resources in the habitat for all the members of the species, preventing a condition where only the fittest can survive. Now if a predator is too greedy, "I'm gonna eat you all," it can overexploit its prey and take more than it needs. However, if the prey species becomes extinct, what will the predator species feed on? This is the reason why predators in nature exercise restraint by not hunting for any more than is necessary. Over time, preys too have adapted themselves to lessen the impact of predation. You would notice frogs, insects, and lizards camouflaging themselves to avoid detection by predators. Certain insects release a distasteful chemical substance that makes them highly unappealing as a lunch meal. While plants don't have the capacity to run away or camouflage the way animals do, defenses such as growing of thorns or releasing of chemical substances helps control the extent of predation. Chemicals such as caffeine, opium, and nicotine that are extracted from plants for commercial purposes are actually produced by them as defense mechanisms against predators. Now when we talk about competition, we generally think of two closely related species fighting it out for the same resources. However, competition can also exist when two completely different species compete for the same resources. For example, a goat and a tortoise feed on basically the same prey. That's competition. One more point, resources need not be scarce for competition to exist. Competition could also occur when the feeding efficiency of one species is reduced due to interference from another species. In simple terms, competition happens when the survival fitness of one species is significantly lower in the presence of others. Gauss, a Russian biologist, proposed a competitive exclusion principle, where he said that when two closely related species compete for the same resources, the relatively inferior species will soon be wiped out by the superior species. This may be true if resources are very limited, but not otherwise. Recent studies have shown that species have evolved mechanisms such as resource partitioning, where two competing species avoid competition by either choosing different times for feeding or by partitioning their preying grounds. A detailed research done on bumblebees at Colorado showed that different species of bumblebees were adapted to draw nectar from a very specific category of flowers, hence very conveniently partitioning their territories. A parasite's life motto is free lodging and free meals. It lives in another organism, derives its food from that organism, and also reproduces there. This is similar to a computer virus, which lives in your computer system, feeds on your confidential information, and multiplies over time. Just as we use antivirus softwares to counteract computer viruses, host species also evolved special mechanisms for rejecting or resisting parasites. Thus, parasites need to constantly evolve to counteract and neutralize these special mechanisms. The majority of the parasites harm the host bodies in which they live in by either making them physically weak or reducing their survival prospects. One of the most widespread parasites that affects human beings is malaria. The malaria parasite has over time become resistant to a lot of anti-malaria drugs introduced by companies. Hence, medical research companies need to constantly create new combinations and more severe dosages to counteract the malaria parasite. Parasites that feed on the external surface of the host organism are called ectoparasites. A typical example of this is lice in human hair. Endoparasites are parasites that live in the body of host species. Take the example of brainworms or the malaria virus we just talked about. Another very interesting concept is brood parasitism. Some bird species simply thrive on outsourcing the task of bringing up their kids to other adult birds. These parasitic birds lay their eggs in the nest of its host and let them incubate it. These parasitic eggs resemble the host eggs in color and size, so the host adult bird is not even aware that it has a foreign egg in its nest. The cuckoo bird is an example of a parasite bird. Commensalism is a symbiotic relationship between two organisms where one organism benefits and the other is not affected. An example of this is frogs in rainforest. The frogs benefit by using the leaves of the trees as shelter from the sun and the rain. The plants are unaffected by the presence of frogs. Vultures feed on the dead body of animals. This is another example of commensalism, as the dead animal really doesn't care what happens to it once it's dead. This is a type of relationship where one organism is harmed and the other is unaffected. This typically happens when the product of one organism has a negative effect on another organism. An example of this could be species which secrete a chemical compound as part of its metabolism that could be detrimental to other surrounding organisms. Take the black walnut tree for instance. It secretes a chemical compound as part of its metabolic process that kills some of the neighboring trees. A more common example is sheep or cattle that create trails when they trample on grasslands. Inadvertently, the sheep are killing the grass they graze on. Close beneficial associations between creatures of different species is nothing unusual. On the contrary, they are the very fabric of nature. Like any friendship, this bonding brings with it so many advantages. Food, protection, cleaning, or just a free ride. Mutualism is what makes most species survive. Take for example the association between the green sea turtle and the gold-ringed surgeonfish which swim together. The turtle has algae growing in its shell. For the fish, this algae is food. Thus it eats up all the algae. Good for the fish, and in the bargain cleans the turtle's shell. Good for the turtle too. Another spectacular example is the relationship between plants and animals. Animals help in pollinating flowers, while the plants in return provide pollen and sweet nectar for the pollinators. Some plants and insects even have an exclusive one-on-one relationship where the particular plant can be pollinated only by its partner insect.